Hey everyone, Ellen here. This is part 2 of bonus episodes from the Girl in a Hurry live show in March of 2025. If you haven't checked out part 1, I'd recommend starting there with my interview with Karen D and the broadband reunion performance. This episode is going to feature my interview with Ann Powers and a few questions we took from the audience. Hope you enjoy it as much as I did. All right, on to the show.
All
Hi,
right.
Ellen.
Hi, Ann.
How are you?
I'm good. I am nervous, but I'm good.
Oh, my goodness, don't be nervous. This is your night and Shelly's night and all of your night. And I'm just so moved. I really am. I'm Ann Powers. I work for NPR, and I'm also a writer and author. I have a book I published last year about Joni Mitchell called Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell, and a book. Thank you. And a bunch of other books. Someone here mentioned a book I did with Tori Amos many years ago. Thank you, Amy, for that. I have also a new book that is relevant to this, I think, which we celebrated last night at the Nashville Public Library, that came from a project I did at NPR called Turning the Tables, which is devoted to telling the stories of underrepresented, overlooked, marginalized, and hidden in plain sight artists, all of which I think describes Shelly perfectly. And that book is called How Women Made Music, A Revolutionary History. But here we're tonight to celebrate this incredible podcast you did, Ellen Angelico, my multi-talented friend, Girl in a Hurry. So first I just want to say, massive congrats. This podcast is so great on so many levels. Let's
Thank
hear
you.
it for her. It's just a super fun listen, a great musical listen. It tells a very personal story that's also emblematic. But most important to me, and given my path in life, is that it does bring to life a woman who absolutely deserves for her story to be centered, and all of her bandmates, some of whom are here tonight. Man, I wanted that set to go on a lot longer than it did, I have to say.
I'm determined to get us out of here. This is an Angelico show.
But where's the after party? That's all I got to ask.
Your own home, peace and quiet. Yeah.
Well, I hope you all reunite. Okay, so first question, just practical. You mentioned the ease of podcast software. Look, I work in this business. It's not that easy. Can you tell us a little nuts and bolts? How did you begin this project? How were you inspired to tell this story? Why a podcast? And then kind of the basics of how.
Okay, so podcast software is easy, but storytelling is not.
Yes.
And I was inspired by our mutual friend and my former roommate, Teddy Minton, and his master's project, which was an oral history of women musicians in Nashville. And I started collecting these interviews with members of Shelly's band and had the idea that I would create this repository of Shelly information that anybody who wanted could access. And I realized as I was starting to amass this glut of interview tape that was not a manageable amount of information for a lay person to parse. And it occurred to me that it needed to have a story. And I was not amassing a glut of videotape, so podcast it was.
What about the story, saying to you the strongest when you were first approaching it? Because as I know, having done biographies, and we all know, any of us who are storytellers, there's always about 50 different roads you can go down at the beginning. There's that fork in the road that's multivalent. So what drew you forward?
The biggest tine on Shelly's fork was her work ethic.
Yeah.
And literally every person that I interviewed mentioned it. Even people who didn't know her personally knew that about her. And it's almost like it was in her DNA. Karen mentioned in the podcast Shelly's dad, Woody, and his work ethic. And it's almost just like that's what she knew. She was a singer, and she wanted to sing, and she wanted to entertain. But she was also a worker.
Yeah.
And so those two things were going to be how she moved forward. I ended up not spending a lot of time talking about the nature of work in the podcast because I don't think that Shelly dwelled on it a lot. My therapist describes ourselves as a coat rack, and different things about ourselves are coats that we can take on and off. You're a Cubs fan. You're a
mom,
bad trombone player or whatever. Yeah, but those things are just coats.
Right.
And the core of you doesn't change. And maybe you don't spend a lot of time, litigating what's going on in that core. I don't think Shelly spent a lot of time
Interesting.
litigating why she worked the way she did.
Well, she was a girl in a hurry.
She was in a hurry.
And she entered a place. She entered a site that is in a hurry. The music business, particularly in Nashville. And one of the most valuable things to me about this podcast is really the story you tell of Lower Broadway. And again, sort of reclaiming stories of people who maybe haven't been held up even within that story. We think of like the Brothers Osborne started down there. You hear these, men mostly who went on to be famous who used to play on Lower Broadway, but these great musicians, some of whom are here tonight, reclaiming that. But let's talk about Lower Broadway a little bit, because it is not unique in that it has parallels like Bourbon Street in New Orleans, for example. But thinking about the kind of job it is, it's a carnival, it's an assembly line, it is a stage, it is all of these things at once. It's elevating and denigrating at the same time. It allows you to hone your artistry while people are like screwing in the back room or like, getting messy drunk on, pina coladas or fireballs or whatever the bridesmaids drink. I don't know. All these contradictions. So I know you have experience down there. Shelly was kind of like an angel of that space. So
Yeah.
talk about Lower Broadway a bit.
Elevating and denigrating is
Yeah.
absolutely what it is. It's denigrating because it's a grind.
Right.
It is hard work to play downtown and do it as your job.
Yeah.
But it's also elevating in some ways. I have friends that primarily play downtown to this day because they don't want to do the hustle of what another type of music career would entail.
Right.
The way that you make connections in the touring world, that happens a lot slower than the way you make connections on Broadway. So you get in on Broadway, and if you're getting in with the right people and you're sitting in, somebody takes a bathroom break and they get to know you, you can get on some shifts in a way that doesn't happen in the touring world.
interesting, yeah.
So they may choose that because they want to support their families and they
Yeah.
want to stay in town. They want to sleep in their own bed.
Right.
It's also elevating because of the musician that you become on Broadway. I don't want to over romanticize the notion of paying your dues because I think that's fraught, but I think that I'm not the musician I was when I was playing down there. Karen and I were talking about that because Karen might be starting to play some more gigs if you need a bass player or a drummer. And
yeah.
how inserting ourselves back into that hustle is going to ask a lot of us as musicians, even though
Yeah.
we're very experienced now, even though we've done some things at very high levels.
Right.
It's not the same as being asked to play this fiddle song at, top speed.
Right. At 2 a.m. or
Right.
later.
Right. When
Or 11 in the morning.
when
you
people
know?
are buying you the whole band shots and,
Right.
and of course you don't have to partake in that, but it's a blur. Playing
Yeah.
downtown is a blur.
Yeah.
It's sensory overload now more than ever.
Well, you start the podcast by talking about yourself, and I actually love how you start. I don't know who has like movie in mind listening to this podcast, because totally we got to sell this thing.
Who would be Shelly?
Oh wow. Well, see, I would cast
like
Laura
Jewel.
Dern.
Who?
Laura Dern, maybe. I don't know if she can sing, but I'm just seeing the
She can make it work.
seeing the vibe,
Yeah.
But I have to think about that. But Amanda Seyfried just played her dulcimer on Jimmy Kimmel or whatever last night, and was no Jimmy Fallon. It was incredible. So she might be aiming for a Joni movie, but I think a Shelly movie's more important than a Joni Mitchell movie, personally. But but when you start the podcast, you say, "I've been on private planes and tour buses and done all these great things," and it's sort of a Dorothy back to Oz moment, or Toto back to Oz, or whatever.
I'm totally Toto. I'm not Dorothy. Yeah. I am 100% an accessory.
And talk about the emotional journey of returning through this narrative back to that place.
The emotional weight of it didn't really hit me until I made the 1-minute trailer that Michael Eads insisted that I make, which, thank you, that is absolutely the right thing to do. I just wanted to put this thing out and move on with my life. It turns out that's not how most people release things.
Yeah, marketing has to happen.
But it was putting this story to a visual that made it really hit home for me. I was playing a really strange gig with Caitlin Nickel-Thomas, who played fiddle for Shelly, and I showed her this video that I thought was fun and light and kind of like told the story in a minute or minute and 30 seconds. And when Caitlin handed me my phone back, she was crying.
Oh, wow.
And I realized that I'd been talking about Shelly to everybody, but none of us had seen her. We hadn't seen her body. We hadn't seen her hair.
Yeah. Wow.
And there was something about that really frightened me. I realized the weight of what I was carrying.
Right.
I realized that I was holding the story of this woman that was gonna live on in everybody's memories and stuff, but didn't have a tangible analog.
Right.
Didn't have, it wasn't written down anywhere.
Right,
And that felt like an enormous responsibility.
Well, we were talking a little bit beforehand about biography and this moment in biography, because I do think this is many things, including biography, that in this moment, a lot of authority seems to be coming from the I, the first person. I use it in the Joni story. We look to the I as a source we can believe, but I also think that's partly because it's an acknowledgement that there really is no objectivity or one story for anyone. But you did invest yourself in this by sharing your own story, your story as a part of Broadband, but your personal story as well. So were there moments when you felt nervous about that or hesitant?
About telling my own story?
Yeah. And how you interlace that with the Shelly story.
I don't know. I didn't really feel nervous about it for myself. I'm kind of, sort of just an open book. I was nervous about it for Shelly because she couldn't speak for herself.
Oh, yeah.
And how do I know how she wanted something to be portrayed?
Right.
We get into sensitive stuff in the podcast, and I didn't know. I mean, and sometimes, I did know how Shelly wanted it to be portrayed, which is that she didn't want it to be portrayed.
Right.
But I wanted people to know Shelly as well as I did.
Right.
Which actually wasn't all that well. I mean, everybody who was on stage with me tonight knows Shelly a lot better than I did. I only played with her for a year and a half at the end of her life.
Right.
So that did make me nervous. It was hard to know what the right thing to do was. Right by her memory, right by her family, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you have to go through a legal check? Like with a lawyer or anything? Okay, take
Should
that, strike that.
Are there lawyers here? Regarding what, Anne?
Well, I don't know. Just like I had to do that with my Joni book.
No, that's because your book is a real thing. I put this podcast
But when
together
we
with-
get the movie made, Ellen,
maybe that
then-
won't be made with the duct tape and shoestring that this one was made with.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the community around Shelly. Band members, many of you are here tonight. I don't know, family members are here also. And
Shelly's cousin Sheila right here.
Hi. And just gathering those interviews. I mean, I've been a journalist for 100,000 years, and yet I still feel nervous when I have to call someone and say, "Oh, would you talk to me?" Did you have to chase anybody? Were there people you had to entice with a delicious meal at J. Alexander's or something?
I did buy Paula Jo a salad at Nadine's, but I think she would have done it anyway. I got a cheesesteak. The hardest person to get a hold of for this was Shelly's best friend, Brenda. And it's not because Brenda wasn't happy to talk to me about it. It's just because Brenda didn't know me, and everybody else in the story I pretty much knew, or I knew somebody who knew him.
Right.
I wanted to wait until I got Brenda because Brenda represented this critical point in Shelly's life that I didn't have a lot of information on, which is when after she had left living with her parents and before she kind of got established in Nashville.
Right.
Really needed that information.
Right.
And then once I got Brenda and I started to think about outlining the story and how it started to coalesce, there were other interviews that I wanted to do. There were people that I tried to get in touch with, especially members of Broadband who were in the band before I was in the band. And, you know, after a certain amount of reschedules and whatever, like, you kind of just have to say, I got to put this podcast out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, for sure.
And I would have loved to have had their input, and I'm sure it would have been better for it. But I also recognized it was at the beginning of, at the beginning of 2024, I realized that the 10th anniversary of her passing was coming up, and I didn't want to, I was like, that's a good goal, time to get this done.
I think it's the perfect length because the story you tell, it feels archetypal and emblematic, and sort of every episode takes us through this hero's journey. I'm just going to say it's shticky and whatever, but the hero's journey is always a useful model when you're telling a story, and Shelly is that, you know. I mean, her drive, it is inspiring, but it's also kind of a cautionary tale, and I wanted to talk about that too. I fell in love with her in this, but she's not perfect, right? And how did you deal with the fact that, for example, as a driver on the road, she endangered her bandmates apparently frequently? I mean, there are just things about her drive and her ambition and the way she lived her life that were not perfect. So how did you deal with that aspect?
I mean, we all gave Shelly shit about her driving.
Right.
Like, I mean, it just wasn't,
Yeah.
it was just plain as day. I mean,
I got to just ask about the whole jackknifing, the van thing, and
yeah.
the nausea that ensued among the band members.
There's a video I can show you later. I mean, yeah, so you would just, like, if you've ever driven a van with a trailer, you know, you can get into some scrapes if the wheels of the trailer are going the other direction from the wheels of the van. And Shelly's response to that circumstance was to lean into it, and she just
well, lean in. It is a feminist motto, I guess. So.
She was leaning in before it was cool, and she would just drive even closer to the trailer, and Mandy sent me this incredibly funny video of all of this going down, and I was able to use a bit of the audio from it for the podcast. But if you look on the video, you see it dawning on me what's going on, which is that no, Shelly is not going to back the trailer out from where it is stuck, which is like what you would do.
Right.
She is going to further endanger the trailer, further endanger the van.
Amazing.
To the absolute brink of where that could physically be possible, and then just keep driving, you know. So she was wild like that. I don't really have a good explanation for it, except that that was the path of least resistance. She was just like, this is how I'm going to do it.
You also have a funny little section on the dancer she hired, or the
legend.
Yeah, that was a wild story.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because as I talked to anybody who had something to say about it, but I mostly talked to Karen and PJ and Dawn Ritchie about it, and they all had different explanations. So Shelly played this gig in Vegas, and for one reason or another, she hired a dancer to be part of the band, and.
I mean, why not? James Brown had dancers.
Well,
you
but
know.
there's an organization to that wasn't present in this circumstance. Whether it was because it was self-imposed pressure from Shelly to make the band hotter, more interesting, or if it was pressure from the promoter because the band wasn't young and hot enough, or there weren't. Dawn had the story that they only brought 5 people and there was supposed to be 6. So there's any number of reasons why Shelly found Miranda or whatever her name was. What was her
Mandy?
name? Melanie. Melanie. Thank you.
Right.
Melanie. But Melanie was just dancing for the whole gig. I mean, the whole gig. There's an incredible video of this on Paula Joe's Facebook page because the band is just sitting there, you know, doing their thing, playing Better Dig 2 by the band Barry, and it just pans over to this dancing solitary woman. And stuff like that was just, it happened, I mean, all the time with Shelly. It was just like, where did this come from?
It's just like endless creativity, I think, you know, or
endless
openness
to circumstances. Yeah.
But this leads me to want to talk a little bit about the quote unquote girl band, all woman band. This is another theme of the podcast. It's interesting when we think about the Bangles. There's a new biography of the Bangles out right now, or the Go-Go's, or if we go back to the great Fanny, I don't know how many of y'all are Fanny fans, June Millington. And,
I once ran into June Millington at NAMM, and I just
did you freak?
I just started screaming at her because
She's amazing.
oh my God!
I know. But I think you capture very well the kind of paradox of the all girl band, all women, all one gender band, which is on the one hand, it feels like a selling point. On the other hand, it can lead to very kind of risky forms of objectification or limits, And again, we're kind of back to the elevating and denigrating thing that is one of the themes of this podcast. What is the message, or if there's one, or like, how did you kind of think about the subject of the all-girl band? I'm trying to use quotes around that word.
Yeah. It's funny. I recognize all of those dynamics, especially in retrospect. They were not of Shelley's concern.
Interesting.
The objectification was of no matter to
Right.
her.
Right.
Obviously, she wanted to look good and she wanted to be a star, so she wanted to dress like a star. She wanted to be beautiful. Right. But I don't think Shelley really worried about people seeing her as an object, or anyone in the band as an object.
Right.
Because in a way, to her, it was an object.
Right.
It was a
Interesting.
means to an end. It was
Yeah.
a tool to
Huh.
get her more gigs.
Interesting.
But
Interesting twist of the word object.
Yeah, it was an actual object.
Yeah,
It was like a wrench, It was a hammer, and gigs were a nail,
right.
and
But
that's
also a goal, kind of like a means to an end, yeah. I'm trying to think of how this object turns into a subject, though, because in the interplay of the band, y'all are subjects to each other. There's a special interplay maybe that happens in all one-gender band sometimes. All
Yeah.
one-gender band, let's just admit it, 99% of history has been all one-gender bands, and that's so boring. I'm glad we're getting out of that phase. But all-woman band.
Yeah.
Are you saying you don't think Shelley was thought about what it meant to play with all women, as a musician?
maybe it occurred to her once in a while. I think she was proud of it. I think she was
Yeah.
proud to have an all-female band. It's funny you're talking about the interplay between the band members, and that was something really interesting that you talked about last night with Adia Victoria, and
Yeah.
how blues is felt by Black women in the body,
Yes.
and how they relate to each other in the body.
Yeah.
I don't think that Shelley was processing the interplay of her bandmates on that level. I think it
okay.
was a more practical consideration for her. But the beautiful thing about it is that was happening.
Yeah.
Even if Shelley wasn't processing it,
Right.
even if it wasn't intentional,
Right.
she created this community of women who have gone on to do amazing things or totally ordinary things. And we all had this shared experience and remember the times that there was an owl on the hood of the van and stuff. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about Shelley's story to me. She had no altruistic intentions, maybe, but she had an overwhelming, to me, altruistic impact.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, even thinking about what it's like for an audience member, say at Sturgis or even on Lower Broadway, for maybe a woman to walk into that bar and see an all-woman band is a different feeling they're going to get anywhere else in those circuits.
150%. When I went downtown and saw Beth Garner playing at Layla's
Right.
with her Fender Quad Reverb amp. Now, many of you in this room are musicians. Fender Quad Reverb, you could Airbnb that for $600 a night in Nashville. That's a big ass amp. It is comically large for a venue like Layla's. And Beth just owned it. And
Right.
she was everything, man. She was rocking, and she was competent, and she was
Right.
sexy, and I was just agog. I was like, this is talk about the archetype. I was like, that's my archetype.
Right,
That's what
right.
that's who I want to be like.
Right, right.
Maybe kind of the dude version of that. But
That's a huge gift, though, that Broadband gave to people.
Beth was sitting in with some other band across the street.
Yeah.
And Suzanne Rohrer Mitchell saw her And Karen D told me this story in the podcast and said to Shelly, "Oh, you better get across the street. Looks like there's a girl playing guitar over there." And she did, and she drug Beth across the street back to the Second Fiddle or Layla's or wherever they were playing, and just drug her up on stage, and they started playing. And that was Beth's foothold in town.
I love
and
it.
now she does blues and R&B and country gigs all over town. She plays with Janelle Means, and she's just like a monster.
That's
She's
amazing.
so good.
Let's talk a little more about Shelly's artistry. First of all, she's a great songwriter. Like, these original songs are fantastic. I love the brightness of her voice and the relatability of her voice. So can you talk a little bit about what you admired in her as a musician, as a singer, and as a writer?
What I admired at the time, especially, was the breadth of her knowledge. She knew so much music, so much music. And then she also didn't know some music. But she knew, like, if it was country from before the year 2000, she genuinely knew it. She was not pulling up, lyrics on her phone. I mean, sometimes she would, but this was kind of before, like, phones. I mean,
Right.
when I was playing downtown with Shelly, like, I didn't always have the internet on my phone. So I wasn't I couldn't down there and look up ultimateguitar.com and try to figure out how to play,
Right.
whatever Merle song I had never heard. She knew that stuff really well, and she could communicate it really, really well. She did not know the stuff after 2000 as well, which led to all kinds of humorous things, including, and this story did not make it into the podcast, but it's one of the funniest things that's ever happened to me. We were playing at Dick's Last Resort on 2nd Avenue, and that was not a good gig. The load-in sucked. You had to go through all the tables, and people are at Dick's Last Resort not to see Shelly and her band. The stage was up really tall. Anyway, it was a lot of reasons that it was not a good gig. Somebody requested Taylor Swift. Shelly didn't know a whole lot of Taylor Swift. So she whips out Our Song by Taylor Swift. And the last lyric of Our Song, were you at this gig, KP? It was you, me, Dawn, and maybe you. And the last lyric goes, I was riding shotgun with my hair undone in the front seat of his car. I grabbed a pen and an old napkin and I wrote down Our Song. And Shelly, I swear to God, goes, I was riding shotgun with my hair undone in the front seat of his car. He's got a one-hand feel on the steering wheel, and I wrote it down on a napkin. And I set my guitar into the stand, and I laid down on the stage, and I wept. Because she wrote it down on a napkin. I just couldn't even...
She got the cons. I mean, like, the gist is there.
Absolutely. She was absolutely riding shotgun with her hair undone, and she did write it down on a napkin. No question about it. What was your question?
No, well, just about her artistry, like what made her fun to play with,
Well, that kind of thing. I mean, she messed up lyrics a lot, but she really genuinely landed on her feet. Like, I did not have that ability when I would lead songs. I'd be so plugged into my iPad, when I got the iPad. That's another thing. I think I am so inspired by who Shelly is. This is going to make it sound trite, and so I'm trying to figure out how I want to say this. But as a business, like...
As a brand, to use a very frightening 21st century term.
I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman type of thing.
Right.
She was a businessman.
Right. We could say, what is it, a diva is a female definition of a hustler.
There we go.
Quote Beyonce instead.
Yes, that's right. She was that, and I wanted to be that. I wanted to have my thing together that much. I was talking with Karen earlier today about Shelly's little pull behind zip overflowing with papers of all of the contacts of every booker, in every city.
Yeah.
She also brought 2 gigantic binders full of charts, A through M and N through Z.
Wow.
And they were huge. She couldn't carry them. They had to be in a milk crate and on a dolly.
Amazing.
And they were like this thick. And it was every song that you could ever be asked to play downtown.
That's
and she
incredible.
would occasionally, new songs would come out, and she would pay a guy a couple bucks to do a chart. And if a tune got called out, well, grab the book.
Wow.
Like, other artists didn't do that for
Yeah.
you. Other artists, you were just on your own. And you would hope that the band was generous enough to tell you how the song went, that you could kind of have a foothold as things went down. But Shelly...
But the music's going to be so much better if she provides that grace to her collaborators.
Totally. The product was better. And I don't know where that comes from for Shelly. Maybe that's maybe that's feminine work in a way.
Interesting. You were
And-
talking about labor before, and there's so much invisible work in this story. you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, other artists don't do that
Yeah.
on Broadway. You got to bring your own charts. They don't have the charts for you.
So one thing that really rang through the podcast for me was that there's kind of two drives in her. One drive is for fame and success, and the next Reba, as you title one of the episodes. And then another drive is just merely to work and to be the queen of Lower Broadway, or the best employee, the employee of the month on Lower Broadway, or at whatever casino or whatever, Sturgis or wherever those places. Those of us who have watched artists try to ascend here, sometimes it involves like laying very low, getting A&R'd, getting developed, not constantly booking new gigs. So how did you see those things either reconciling in her or crashing up against each other in her?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly crashing up against each other because A&R man's not going to keep your lights on, no matter
right.
how many meetings you schedule.
That's very true.
You know?
So in a sense, it was practical. It was just
Yeah.
more practicality.
I think so. I think it was Shelly's job, but she met with people more than anybody else met with people.
Yeah, you were telling those stories. And the people who would be in the rooms sometimes in Lower Broadway, Barry Beckett and Buddy Cannon, and just these legends checking her out.
Yeah, she just hustled until they showed up.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, it is wild because it's so hard to get somebody to notice you
Completely.
when you don't have anything to offer them except, maybe I'm good at music.
And they're coming to see her probably a cover set mostly.
Yeah.
With a lot of drunk people around, or maybe nobody around. Just the sheer cojones, the sheer ova, to put out your best show in a room that might have 3 people who are even listening.
I mean, we played that 2 to 6 Thursdays to nobody all the time.
Yeah, that's wild. So this is a hard question, but she had everything. She was the total package. Ultimately, why do you think she didn't break through and have that moment, the Trisha Yearwood moment or something like that? Was it just luck?
I don't know. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time talking about it in the podcast because I don't think it matters, for starters.
It's not the center of the podcast.
Yeah.
At all. You do raise some prejudices, though. You expose some prejudices of Music Row, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And that's just it. The prejudices of Music Row. It's
Right.
the same. It's everybody's story who doesn't have a Trisha Yearwood moment.
Who is it in the podcast that says, could you even imagine a female jelly roll?
Beth, yeah.
That's so true. I mean,
Yeah.
sad but true.
It's still, all these years later, we don't have that example. And so it's the same. I mean, I'm not saying like woe is me or anything, but
Right.
like I know the conversations that I'm not in this
Yeah.
business. I'm
Yeah.
well aware. I'm aware of the times that my name does end up in those conversations and how quickly it gets swatted away.
Interesting.
And I don't, it doesn't bother me because I know that I want to go where I'm wanted.
Right,
right. The reasons that Shelly didn't ascend to the level of fame that she aspired to are the same reasons that everybody doesn't.
Right, exactly. And why we still have so few women's voices on country radio, so few women's voices on playlists, so few black artists charting, etc.
Yeah.
I guess it's just very obvious, the answer to that question.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's no one reason.
Yeah.
It's every reason.
Exactly.
And I was at her longtime friend and former boyfriend Rod Jansen's house picking up all this incredible Shelly
I know.
ephemera.
I love the ephemera. It's so great.
He was telling me about some of the meetings that she would go to that they said they already had a blonde girl. So it doesn't have to be that.
What, in this town they already had a blonde girl? What?
So it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be for some nefarious. It can be as.
It's carelessness. It's the bad habits of the patriarchy,
Right.
which unfortunately.
Become systems.
Yes, exactly. Well, I feel like we can make her a cult artist quite easily because the music is so great, and there's such an interest in that sound now. I mean, how would you classify the broadband sound? Would you say it like sits next to kind of a 90s style?
It's like Jody Messina, it's like Leanne Womack. It stands up to all of those records. I have now in my possession 8 Shelly CDs that if I could just get my dang CD drive to work, I would rip them and try to figure out,
Right.
what's the status of these masters and put them up on streaming. There's one record of Shelly's that is on Apple Music that's not on Spotify. It's called Don't Fall in Love. And I believe the reason that it's up there is because of an Irish record label called L&M Records, long defunct. Good luck to me trying to figure out who owns those masters. I remember listening to it and just being like, holy cow. I had a college radio show called the Nashville Hotline because I was so obsessed.
Of course you did.
Because
Of course it was called the Nashville Hotline.
I was so obsessed with country music, and I just remember hearing this record of Shelly's and being like, College Ellen would have been all over this.
Right, exactly.
Been all over it.
Yeah,
It's just good.
We got to get it out there for sure. I think the world needs to wise up to broadband for sure. The last question from me, and then we'd love to hear any questions from y'all. You deal very sensitively, I think, with the end of Shelly's life. It fits with the hero's journey, the determination, even if it was medically perhaps a little naive, unfortunately. How did you manage telling that part of the story? And you had great input from the family, which was beautiful.
Yeah. Shelly's mom, Shirley, was so generous to
Yeah.
reopen that wound
Yeah.
for me. That was the hardest interview to conduct because I felt the weight of a mother
Yeah.
losing her child. It was so intense. I can feel myself getting, I can feel the liquid forming just thinking about it. At the same time, telling that part of the story was in a way easier than telling some other parts of the story because I was there for that.
Right.
I lived that. I
Right.
was in the hospital, not as much as some other people, but I did see her and I saw the state that she was in and I saw, the conversations that were going on and I was texting her.
Right.
And it was this whole conversation with all of us, like, she's going to Texas, like, what's she doing in Texas? I was actually doing a radio tour with somebody in the UK the day that she passed away. I remember processing all that, and I went back in my journals and I found, that time. And
I love that you include those entries from your journal.
I was able to go back to my own brain in that time and mine exactly how I was feeling.
I mean, in a strange way, there's a circular quality to being a musician at any level, but particularly at the level that Shelly was at, where I think something happens. My friend Patterson Hood has a song in Drive-By Truckers called The Living Bubba, and it's about a sound guy they had who died of AIDS. The refrain of the song is, I've got another show to do. I've got another show to do. And even as he was heading toward the end, it's just like you got another show to do, And again, it's back to labor, it's back to capitalism in a way, but it's also back to artistry and that feeling that if I can just get in the music, it's not that I won't be in my body, but I will have another turn of the wheel.
Yeah, that's very powerful because that's who she was. Playing shows is who she was.
Right.
And so it's almost like it would have been weirder if she wasn't booking shows
Right.
from the hospital.
Right.
That would have been way less Shelly. It's her identity. And it gets me thinking about my own identity and like whether or not I better get some other marketable skills or something.
But it's not, and given the state of the economy for artists, I mean, there's also a powerful message in this podcast that relates to where we're at today. And given the continual incursions on the possibility of making any money as a touring artist, this is this will be my final question, but do you feel there's another way? Like, for musicians like Shelly, like broadband, like you?
I hope so. When the effects of the pandemic began to play out on the touring music community, I hoped that it would lead to a renaissance in small scenes.
Yes, me too.
And in some ways I see that. In some ways I see it in Nashville, and maybe I'm just not clued into it in other cities, the way that our mutual friend venue, Dark Matter, has thrived
Yes.
as a nonprofit.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a model that we can look to, but the going has been a little slower than I thought. I do hope for it. I also think, though, there's a distinction between a working musician like me, and I'm not trying to say that it's better or worse than being an artist or whatever, but I'm not the product. So as long as there are people who are willing to be the product, there will be work for me. The question of the artist is one that I haven't spent as much time thinking about.
Well, maybe that's your next podcast, Ellen.
What, that should I write more songs? Yeah. I did write one recently, somewhat recently, called "Who's Gonna Move This Dead Guy's Truck and Get It Off My Lawn?" Based on the true events of
A
my
Nashville story.
neighbor's
or Madison story.
grandson dying with his truck right in front of my house. And we had been asking him to move the truck for ages, and then he just up and died.
Oh my gosh, that's a classic, I tell you.
Does that answer your question?
On that note, does anyone want to ask a question or make a comment? Or
Oh, hey, Angie.
I feel like something I love about this project is like similar to listening to like one of my favorite albums. Is like there feels like there's this underlying like truth to all of it. And I'm curious like what that message was for you, or what message you really want the listener to feel once they listen to her whole story.
Angie asked, what's the underlying truth of this project for me, and what's the message that I want people to take away? And that's a big question. My gut reaction is that I don't want people to take the histories they are presented at face value. I want people to I want you to find the people who widened the path for you.
right,
And tell those stories. That's the history that matters.
that's beautiful. I love that.
The canons that exist in the music business are told through the eyes of the people who had the money to tell
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So I want to challenge that
Yeah.
notion.
Absolutely. You do. I think you really do beautifully.
Thanks.
And also a very powerful message about how music is community, and music is interplay, and music is friendship. And I think that can be something we can so easily forget as consumers of music, when at this point we don't even know sometimes when we're streaming our chill vibes, making a stir-fry playlist on streaming service. We don't even know if that music was made by a person at this point, or you know what I mean? It's like AI is moving in all these things. But to me, the value of a story like this is that it's just about love. Oh God, that's so corny, but it is. It's about human bonds, It's about connection, and that's what's so beautiful about it.
Even as there's an artificial nature now to the way that music ends up in our fore, I've never found that feeling anywhere else. That feeling when you're making music with someone and you're really locked in. The feeling of being connected to that musician, to the people in the audience, to the notion that there's something bigger than yourself that you're experiencing.
Yeah, and also the evocation of place is so great. I was thinking of, I'm from Seattle, Mia Zapata from the band The Gits, who was like an amazing punk singer who was murdered right around the time Kurt Cobain died. And I did a story for the Village Voice. I went back, and it was so fascinating. I went back to tell the story of the aftermath of Kurt's death, and what I ended up doing was telling the story of the aftermath of Mia's death, because Kurt was off being a rock star, and Mia was right there in Capitol Hill, right there in the city, connected to so many people. Or I think of Jesse Malin in New York City, the kind of like the patron saint of the downtown New York scene. He suffered a spinal stroke a while back, and there was just this incredible like tribute album to him, benefit album. That's a guy who is glue, and Shelly was glue in a way.
Jesse Zazu.
Yes, Jesse, our mutual friend, such an important person, and
these people are connectors.
Yes, exactly. And you need a place to be connected. I mean, it's cool to be connected online, but it's not the same.
No.
Anyone else want to ask a question, make a comment? Hi.
So on the road, a lot of men diminish women in bands going on gigs and stuff. moments where you had with men on the road and stuff.
Yeah, when did you encounter men on the road?
That diminishing of your abilities.
My personal experience in Nashville has been, for the most part, if you can play, you can play.
But you can really play, so maybe that's why.
That's been my experience.
I don't recall encountering men a lot when we traveled. I mean, there were sound guys, but we didn't like deal with them a lot, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
one advantage of being an all-woman band is that, unlike, say, if you're one woman in a band, you aren't assumed to be a girlfriend or a groupie or a fanager or whatever. I've talked to a lot of women that happened to, like in the rock scene, where if you got one woman in the band, you're kind of messed up because people, especially sound guys, notorious for being like, why are you on stage?
I've experienced that with people who are enormous successes. And it's partly because I am pretty assertive and I have a masculine affect that somebody like that will come up to me and ask, well, where does this plug in? And it's like, well, why don't you ask Brandy fucking Clark? It's her DI.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
or whatever, you know. Shelly kind of created, she didn't mean it. She never read any books about it, but she sort of created a feminist utopia.
That's amazing.
Before we wrap up, I want to say a very special thank you to my friend Karen Pittleman. Karen is a musician. Her band is called Karen and the Sorrows. I know her through music, but it turns out she's also a gifted writing coach. This podcast would have been extremely bad without her. Please check out her beautiful album, Why Do We Want What We Want, and thank me later. She is a legend. She's a brilliant thinker. She has a great Medium piece called Another Country. She's real bright, and she helped me out a lot. I also need to thank Michael Eads of We Own This Town. Michael has given so much of his time and energy to this podcast. He made the website. He put the show out on his network. He talked me off of several audio engineering ledges. Nashville is lucky to have him, and I'm lucky to have him. He is the embodiment of the Nashville I love best, what Karen Pittleman describes as another country music, older and far more powerful, flowing underneath this industry, bubbling up through its fissures and cracks, rolling free out in the backwoods, out in a thorny brush where there are no industry profits and so no industry control.
Beautiful.
Also, thank you to Whippoorwill Arts for providing me a grant so I could get professional transcripts done of these interviews. Y'all, I was doing the transcripts myself, and that is so dumb.
So refreshing.
And AI hadn't really happened yet while I was doing that, and then AI came around and did a bad job, and so Whippoorwill Arts gave me a grant so that I could get humans to transcribe what the other humans had said. It wouldn't have happened without that. Thank you to all of my friends and family who read and listened to this before it was ready for prime time. I saw Justin Hiltner at your thing last night, and I remembered that he listened to this when it had no narrative at all.
Oh, wow.
And Julie did too, when
wow.
it was just when I was trying to just string the tape together.
It's Julie Height.
I was making it was closer to like a John Cage piece than it was to a podcast. So thank you to everybody who listened to this when it was inchoate and lousy. And thank you all for coming and being a part of this remarkable story. Have a good night.
Woo, let's hear it for Ellen. Yay! And like a true Lower Broadway road musician, you will now break down the set yourself, probably, right?
Yeah. Take these dangerous ones off.
Girl in a Hurry was produced and edited by me, Ellen Angelico. This episode was mixed by Liv Lombardi. Special thanks to Karen Pittleman and Michael Eads.